Good evening, I'm Sophia Arena, Texpatriate staff writer, and this is our Week in Review. First and foremost this week, the U.S. Senate took momentous steps to curb the power of the obstructionist filibuster technique. The filibuster, which requires a 60-vote supermajority to end discussion on any debate in the upper chamber, was amended so that it would only continue to apply to debates on legislation and Supreme Court nominees. It will now be impossible to filibuster proceedings and confirmation on any other presidential nominee. The decision by the Democrat majority was met with harsh indignation by the Republican minority in the chamber, who accused leadership of subverting the democratic process. However, the most pressing application of this issue to Texas is that it may clear up a backlog on President Obama's nominees to federal courts with jurisdiction over parts of the state. The net result could be a significantly more liberal Fifth Circuit appeals court and the district courts therein. In statewide news, the biggest story this week was that State Senator Letitia Vandeputte, a Democrat from San Antonio, officially announced her candidacy for lieutenant governor. In a high-profile announcement yesterday, Vandeputte deplored incumbent David Dewhurst, who himself is facing a tough re-election in the primary election. Vandeputte, encountering only token opposition in the Democratic primary thus far, is heavily favored to cruise to the nomination. In a recent poll, Dewhurst was up by 8 points. Additionally, the fight over HB 2, the anti-abortion bill, Wendy Davis filibustered, has come to a close, at least until January. This week, the Supreme Court divided 5-4 declined to block provisions of the law from going into effect before a federal appeals court hears arguments over the constitutional merits of the case early next year. Already, implementation of the law has been blamed for closing over a dozen clinics, including all those offering abortions in the Rio Grande Valley and west of San Antonio. The State Board of Education also made the news on multiple occasions this week. Most notably, it voted 14-1 to discontinue requiring the passage of Algebra 2 in order to graduate from high school. The new standards simply require high school students to have a mastery of both Algebra 1 and basic geometry in order to graduate under newly configured specialized diplomas. These diplomas would render the student ineligible for certain privileges upon graduation, such as qualifying for the coveted top 10% program to public universities in the state. While this may seem like a short-term solution, it's really going to be a long-term problem when these students graduate and realize that it's going to be harder to get into college. While it may have been easier to graduate from high school, they're going to realize that missing out on the top 7, top 10% rule and not qualifying for automatic admissions into any colleges is going to make it harder to get into some of our state's best schools. The board also voted 9-6 this week to retain the use of evolution and biology classrooms, as well as voting to continue a statewide cap on the number of charter schools allowed at any one time. We also mourn the death of Reuben Centerfit, a former Speaker of the State House who was instrumental in the creation of the MD Anderson Cancer Center. A former candidate for governor in the 1950s, he was 96. In city news, the few runoff elections produced little tangible news. Among the exceptions were in the race for at-large position number 3, where Roy Morales, one of the candidates, attempted to sue the other candidate, Michael Kubosh, in a desperate attempt to keep him off the ballot. Morales alleged his opponent did not live in the city limits and sought a temporary restraining order to that effect from a local district court judge. The judge quickly denied the motion and dismissed the arguably frivolous case. In District I, runoff candidates Robert Gallegos and Graciana Garces kept at one another's throats in possibly the year's dirtiest campaign. Ben Mendez, who finished in third place in the general election, made a high-profile endorsement of Gallegos. Meanwhile, Garces' campaign accused Gallegos of trading off of name recognition and falsely leading people to believe he is related to the late state senator Mario Gallegos. At City Hall, meanwhile, Mayor Parker had what many have been calling her best week in office thus far. First, on Wednesday, the City Council unanimously passed her wage theft ordinance, which cracks down on companies engaging in the practice of wage theft by blacklisting them from city contracts. Wage theft is typically defined as any employer not giving her or his employees their earned compensation. Often this takes the form of intentional misclassification or denial of overtime and benefit pay. That same day, Mayor Parker announced a new policy for municipal workers, citing the Supreme Court's recent decision striking down parts of the Defense of Marriage Act. The Parker administration revealed that it would grant full spousal benefits to all legally married employees of the city of Houston, even if those workers had been married to someone of the same gender in another state. Texas, of course, does not perform nor recognize same-sex marriages, but the Supreme Court decision has now given cover for the federal government and other jurisdictions to recognize the unions anyway. A high-profile lawsuit over the constitutionality of this action will be sure to follow. Finally, Mayor Parker announced a tough new plan to crack down on payday lending stores. These stores, which are often the last place of refuge for financially weak individuals, have charged astronomical interest rates and often engage in predatory tactics against borrowers. The proposed ordinance aims to curb some of the excessiveness of this business by regulations on things such as fees and contracts. Lastly, but certainly not least, I have some very exciting news to share on behalf of all of Texpatriate. This upcoming January, editorial board member Noah M. Horowitz will relocate to the Texas Capitol, transferring his collegiate education to the University of Texas at Austin in order to better accomplish personal and professional goals. Accordingly, we are planning on expanding Texpatriate's visibility by creating a more permanent presence within Austin, our state's capital, just before the gubernatorial election begins to heat up. More details will follow shortly. This is our Week in Review.